So today I want to talk about some of the stuff relating to the Ark of the Covenant, as you probably deduced already. Um, so, uh, so I'll start in Hebrews 9 verses 1 through 5, and I'm basically paraphrasing. I'm not reading it verbatim. But so the first covenant had a tabernacle, and in the inner holiest part it had the Ark of the Covenant, so that's where they kept it. And in it were three items: the golden pot with manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Just as a side, if Aaron's rod really did go in that, then the maximum, it's a kind of a shorter rod. It wasn't one of these real long ones, if it actually fit in something that size. Now, so now I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to look at 1 Kings. This is the end of 1 Kings 7 and 1 Kings 8 verses 1 through 9. And again, I'll just paraphrase it. So at the end of 1 Kings 7, it shows where Solomon's administration had finished the temple and placed all the treasures and furniture and everything else in it. And then Solomon and the leaders of Israel brought the Ark of the Covenant from the previous tabernacle, which I assume was some kind of a tent arrangement still, even though they had settled in Jerusalem and stuff. But that's what I guess. I don't think it says. Anybody knows, they can correct me there. And then with much pomp and circumstance, they put the ark in the inner sanctuary of the temple. And verse 9, I'll quote this, says, "Nothing was in the ark except the two tablets of stone which Moses put at Horeb." So somewhere in history, in the approximately 500 years between Moses and Solomon, the articles, the manna and the rod, weren't in the cabinet, weren't in it anymore. Now, some people think that Hebrews 9 is not being 100%, to take it as literally as saying it actually inside, that perhaps they were laid in front or next to it. And when I get to the verses that kind of support that conclusion, totally unimportant whether they're inside or not. I kind of think maybe they were inside, but I don't really know, obviously. But in any event, they weren't inside at the time of Solomon's, because it explicitly says nothing was in there except the stone tablets. Okay, so I'll talk about the rod. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Ten Commandments, because that's just too famous. Everybody knows about the Ten Commandments, and we've got a limited amount of time here. I'm going to talk about the rod to start off with. Now, the story of the rod starts with the story of Korah. And so I'll mention June 1:11. And this is Jude talking about ungodly persons who had infiltrated the church. And it says, "Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit, and perished in the rebellion of Korah." So there's referring to Korah. And so here's the account of Korah in number 16. And it's kind of a long account, so I'm just going to give a quick recap. Korah and 250 leaders, now he was of the tribe of Levi, and 250 leaders of Israel rebelled against Moses and Aaron. Of course, they were really rebelling against God. And they thought they had just as much right to lead as those two guys did. Well, it turned out very badly for them, as God ended up destroying all of them. Some of them got sucked into the ground with and all their possessions and their tents and their family even, in a big earthquake where the earth opened up. And the men themselves either got zapped by lightning or some other fireballs from heaven, but they were consumed from fire from heaven. Regardless, it ended badly for that bunch. And it led into the story immediately thereafter God wanted to reassert to the rest of the congregation who was supposed to be in charge because he had put them there. And so this is picking up in Numbers 17, 1 through 11. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to Israel and get from them rods, from all their leaders, according to their father's house, 12 rods. So one representative from each of the 12 tribes. And write his name on it. And then also write Aaron's name upon his rod. And then put them in front of the tent of the meeting before the testimony where I meet you. And the rod of the man whom I choose will sprout. And thus I will make people quit grumbling and murmuring. They'll answer the question once and for all." Which, of course, nothing could stop the children of Israel from grumbling and murmuring. But anyway, of course, I know I complain a lot too, so maybe I'm not that much different. But anyway, and then, so they did as God asked, and sure enough, it was Aaron's rod that budded. And verse 8 says, it produced blossoms and ripe almonds. Well, that's a lot over one night, so you can't just say, obvious miracle there. And then the Lord told Moses, "Put the staff of Aaron before the covenant." So there it says before the covenant. Of course, at that point, the ark could have existed at that point. That's right. So the ark might have existed then. To be kept as a warning to rebels. And that's key. To be kept as a warning to rebels, so that you will make an end of their complaints against me, or they will die. And so Aaron put the staff before the covenant. So Korah became famous, but for a bad reason. Now, he's also mentioned in Numbers 26:9, just to kind of wrap this part up. It's like, the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. Now, these are the same Dathan and Abiram that were representatives of the congregation who contended against Moses in the company of Korah. There were some of the ringleaders along with Korah. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them together with Korah when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign. And then it kind of a little side note I thought was a little interesting. Verse 11 says, "Notwithstanding, the sons of Korah did not die." So maybe they had done something to redeem themselves. But anyway, so the manna. And so the key verse of manna is Exodus 16:33. "And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept through your generations." So now we get to this red bowl I got here. Omer, they're a little bit less, when you look it up, they're a little bit less certain about what an omer is. But the most common or best guess, I guess, is that it's 60% of a gallon, 0.6 gallons. And that's almost exactly what this cup holds. So when they got an omer of manna, it was filling this up. So now I'm going to go over chapter 16, backing up to the front of that chapter. And it's also a long passage, so I'm just going to summarize it. So the children of Israel, this is after they had left Egypt, about 45 days after that, 45 days after that, it went to a place called the Wilderness of Sin. Now that's just a coincidence of English, because it really had nothing to do with the English word sin. It's just a name, but still an interesting coincidence. Now, it had been 44 days since they left Egypt, and their food was running out. And later on, we'll see where God intentionally waited so they'd be hungry. I mean, he was testing them. He knew they were going to get hungry. And so he actually did that on purpose. And their food was running out. But instead of asking it in an adult, good way, they were complaining and murmuring against Moses, Aaron, and God. And they were saying stuff like, "I wish we would have died in Egypt. I mean, it's so bad out here. Well, we at least had plenty to eat. And then he's accusing Moses of, you brought us out here just to starve, which of course is a false accusation. And then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people will go out, and I'm actually quoting here, and gather a day's portion every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. So, skipping down to verse 13. So in the evening, quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there on the face of the wilderness was a fine flake-like thing, fine as hoarfrost on the ground. I guess that's like regular frost, I'm not sure. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? Now I'll digress a little bit. I think the Hebrew word for that is actually manna. And so, I don't know if it's exactly pronounced that way, but so our word English manna is really just the same as what they call it in Hebrew. Anyway, it is, and then Moses would tell them, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Now there were several rules regarding the manna that God weaved in this story. They were to get an omer per person per day. So they would get this much, this is how much they had to eat. Now the day the quail came, of course, they had a little bit extra, they got the quail too, but this is, for 3 meals, you're not going to gain a whole lot of weight on that, unless it's like super, super dense. But, it's enough to survive on. And they were to get exactly enough for them, don't get extra. And of course, I guess if they got less, they'd just have to do without. But they weren't to get extra, essentially. And now, of course, some of them did get extra. And it had worms in it the next morning. And it stunk. On the 6th day, they were supposed to get a double portion. And they were to prepare the entire amount, like boil it or bake it, it says, and then save half of that prepared for the next day, which I had forgotten. They didn't save it in the raw form to the next day. If they had, I think that would have been violating his rules, and it probably would have stunk. Because I think part of it is God didn't want them baking and boiling on the Sabbath either. And back then, those kind of activities was a lot more labor intensive than popping 2 pieces of bread into a toaster, right? So, but anyway, but it didn't spoil, and then they weren't to go out to gather on the 7th day. Well, for one reason, because God wasn't going to have any out there. But of course, some did, and when they got out to the fields or where it was at, they discovered there was nothing to pick up. And then it did melt each day when the sun came out, so it wasn't like you could just go get it whenever. They had to go somewhat in the morning, obviously after the dew went up, but so sometimes in mid-morning. And now, God got angry about the ones that broke his rules on that, and the Lord said to Moses, quoting, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. And then so the people did rest the 7th day. And I guess even stubborn people realize there's no use to go if it's completely useless. So they kind of had to abide by that rule. Now the house called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Have no idea what coriander seed is, but I didn't think to look that up. But anyway, it sounds actually pretty good, wafers made with honey. And this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. So, about an omer of it was placed in the covenant, Ark of the Covenant, which obviously there's plenty of room for that. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. Well, yeah, I already read that. So Aaron did do that. He got the jar and put it there. And the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they came to a habitable land, which was the border of Canaan. So it does say Aaron placed the jar before the testimony. Now this was before the Ark of the Covenant was even built, because it was before the Ten Commandments and stuff. So he couldn't have put it in there at that point. However, if you look at Exodus 25, when it's talking about making the ark, it says, and this is Exodus 25, verse 21, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I have given you, that I shall give you. That I shall give you. Interesting. It doesn't mean anything, it doesn't mention anything else being put in there, which I just now realized it said, I will give you. I wonder when it was made, but I assumed it was made later. But anyway, at that point, they should have had the manna. And so I'm surprised that it doesn't say they put that in there if it was actually inside. But again, it's not that important. So now at the time, manna had value physically of its own. It was absolutely essential for Israel. They had millions of people, nowhere to grow food. Their cattle and stuff wouldn't last that long if they started eating them. So it was their survival, and that's God sustained them. But it also became a very important symbol, and it's mentioned a few other times in the Bible, especially in John 6. And this is where Jesus compared himself directly with manna. You hear it say, I'm the bread of life, but went beyond that. He was comparing himself to manna as being the bread of life. And so this is right after Jesus had fed the 5,000 people, and he had walked on the water. And then in verse 24, the people had seen the disciples leave, but they didn't see Jesus. But they didn't know he walked on the water to get away from them. So they were looking for Jesus. They couldn't find him. And they finally went over to the other side of the sea there and found him over there. And when they found him, Jesus told them the only reason they were looking for him is because he had given them, food miraculously. And but then Jesus told them, do not, and this is quoting verse 27, do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, for on him has God the Father set his seal. And then the people asked him, well, what do we got to do? And Jesus told them that to believe in him whom God sent. And they asked, well, if we're going to believe in you, what sign are you going to do for us? God gave our fathers manna. Do you have a cool sign like that, basically? And as if feeding them with 5,000 the day before wasn't a sign enough. I'm not sure about these people. But anyway, but then Jesus answered that and said, look, I say to you, it wasn't Moses who gave you that bread from heaven. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And they said, well, hey, give us that bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. And then down in verse 48, because these are very familiar, we hear them all the time at Passover, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, that a man may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which comes from heaven, and if anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And so, and then Deuteronomy 8 fills in a little more of the manna story. And this is 8 verse 2. And it says, "And you shall remember all the way which your Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger," which is what I was mentioning earlier, that God let them hunger, "and fed you with manna, which you didn't know, nor your fathers knew, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but that man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord." So those were the 3 sacred objects, well, plus the 10 Commandments, that were placed in the ark. So we saw where the rod was there symbolically to, quote, to be kept as a warning to the rebels. The Bible tells us that manna was there, quote, "that we may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness," reminding them of manna. And of course, reminding them of that reminds them that it was God that sustained them, that God gave them his good gifts, and to me it was a demonstration of his mercy and grace. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that, no, of course they didn't know this at the time, that it pointed ahead to the Messiah. And the symbolism of the tablets symbolizes the law. I think it's pretty obvious. So in summary, I would say the 3 objects summarize God's judgment, his grace, and his law.